The day my brother stood at the head of the conference table and accepted a standing ovation for a project I had spent 11 months building from scratch, I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I sat in the back row with my hands folded in my lap and I smiled, because I had already decided what I was going to do next. Let me back up. My name is Avery. I'm 31 years old and I worked as a senior project architect at a mid-sized urban planning firm in Cincinnati. I say worked loosely because the firm was technically co-founded by my uncle, which is how my older brother Caden ended up with a director title he didn't earn and an expense account he absolutely abused. My uncle retired 4 years ago and handed over day-to-day operations to a managing partner named Mr. Foss, who had no idea what anyone in our family actually did, only what they were told. And what they were told for years was that Caden was the talent. I was the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who stayed late and never asked for credit because I told myself it was enough to do good work. My mom used to say I had too much pride to brag, which sounds like a compliment, until you realize what she actually meant was, you're not fighting for yourself and I'm not going to fight for you either. She was proud of Caden in the way some mothers are proud of their loudest child, reflexively, loudly, without much examination of whether the pride was deserved. I paid her mortgage for 2 years. She doesn't know that either. When my dad got sick in 2021, the bills came fast and the savings went faster. My parents had a house in Blue Ash with a mortgage they'd refinanced twice, and a property tax bill that had crept up every year. My dad went on disability. My mom worked part-time at a dental office and brought in maybe $1,800 a month. The gap was significant. I was 28. I'd been promoted to senior associate. I had no debt because I'd lived like a monk through my 20s, and I had a small but real amount in savings. I set up an automatic transfer, $3,000 a month, routed through a joint account I opened with my mum, listed as a household contribution. I told her it was to help with groceries and utilities. I didn't tell her the full amount. I didn't want her to feel like a burden, or maybe, if I'm honest, I didn't want to have the conversation where she said thank you, and then called Caden to brag about what a good daughter I was, and Caden would have made some comment about how I was always trying to be the responsible one, like it was a character flaw. Caden, at that time, was living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Hyde Park that he could not afford on his actual salary. I know this because I co-signed the lease when he moved in. He asked me to. He said he just needed help getting through the credit check, that he'd be fine after a few months. That was 3 years ago. He never asked me to remove my name, and I forgot about it until it mattered. He drove a leased BMW 5 Series that my uncle had originally leased through the company for business use and then quietly allowed Caden to keep when he retired. The payments came out of a corporate card that still existed. I'm not sure anyone had ever examined that line item closely. His girlfriend, now fiancée, is named Sloane. She's the kind of woman who refers to her skincare routine as an investment, and once told me at Christmas that she thought it was so brave of me to still be single at my age. She said it with complete sincerity. That almost made it worse. The project that changed everything was called the Millvale Corridor Initiative. It was a mixed-use development proposal for a stretch of underutilized land along the Mill Creek Corridor on the near west side of Cincinnati. Affordable housing units integrated with green space, a transit connection study, community retail. Real work, the kind of thing that takes months of site analysis, zoning research, community feedback sessions, and about 400 hours of CAD work that nobody outside the profession understands or appreciates. I had been assigned the project as the lead architect. I ran at every meeting. I coordinated with the city planning office. I drove out to the site on Saturday mornings. I wrote the narrative sections of the proposal myself at night after dinner with a glass of water and the kind of focus that comes from actually caring whether a thing is good. Caden was listed as project director on the internal org chart because that was his title and that's what the org chart said. He attended maybe 4 meetings out of 30. He had opinions about the color palette in the renderings. In February, we submitted the proposal to the city. In April, the city came back with conditional approval, one of the larger wins the firm had seen in several years. Mr. Foss scheduled an all-hands presentation for the following Tuesday. I found out about the framing of that presentation the same way I found out about most things involving my brother accidentally. I was in the kitchenette refilling my water bottle when I heard him on the phone in the hallway telling someone, his fiancée, I think, that he was about to present his Millvale project to the full team and that the managing partner had already mentioned a possible promotion. I stood very still. I want to tell you that I walked out there and said something. I want to tell you that I was the woman in the movie who sets down her coffee cup and speaks her truth clearly and calmly while everyone watches. But I wasn't, not that day. I went back to my desk. I opened my laptop, and I started making the list. The presentation happened on a Tuesday. Caden stood at the front of the glass-walled conference room and narrated slides I had built, describing a process I had led. Accepting questions he answered vaguely or not at all. When someone asked about the transit connection modelling, he said, "That was a team effort," and gestured broadly at the room, which included me, sitting in the third row, saying nothing. The applause was genuine. Mr. Foss shook his hand. I drove home that evening on autopilot. I made pasta. I ate it standing at the kitchen counter. I didn't cry, which surprised me. I thought I would cry. Instead, I felt something settle in my chest. Not peace exactly, more like the moment before a decision, when the noise quiets down and you can hear yourself think. I started that night. The first thing I did was pull up the documentation. I had 11 months of emails, meeting notes, draft files with timestamps, version histories, coordination logs with the city planning office, all of it sitting in my work drive and my personal cloud backup, because I back everything up, because I am the kind of person who backs everything up. I started compiling a folder. I organized it chronologically. I was thorough in the way that people are thorough when they know what they're building toward and they want to make sure nothing falls apart later. The second thing I did was contact an employment attorney. I had a friend from college who'd gone into labor and employment law, and I texted her that night. She called me the next morning. I explained the situation. She said the word misattribution and asked about the documentation. I told her about the folder. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "Okay, let's set up a time to talk properly." The third thing I did was call my landlord about the apartment. I had lived in my current apartment for 4 years. I liked it. It was in Oakley, second floor, good light, close to the park. But it was not where I was going to stay, and it was not the point. The point was the lease on Caden's apartment in Hyde Park, the one with my name still on it. I called the property management company and explained that I was a cosigner who wished to be removed from the lease at the next renewal date, which was 90 days out. They walked me through the process. I submitted the request in writing that afternoon. Caden didn't know I'd done it. He would find out. The fourth thing I did was the one that took the most patience. I waited. I waited 6 weeks. I kept going to work. I kept doing my job. I started a new project, a smaller one, a library renovation in Norwood. And I put my name clearly on every document, every email, every meeting agenda. I CC'd Mr. Foss on updates without explanation. I just made myself visible in the way I had never bothered to be before. In those 6 weeks, 2 things happened. The first, my employment attorney filed a formal grievance with the firm's HR department on my behalf, citing misattribution of professional work, supported by the documentation folder, which by then had grown to include timestamped file metadata, the original project assignment email sent to me, not to Caden, and records of my direct communications with the city planning office on the firm's behalf. HR contacted me for a meeting. I brought my attorney. I was composed. I laid out the timeline. The second thing that happened was that the lease renewal notice went out to Caden's apartment. His landlord sent it in early May. The notice included the updated cosigner status, which was no longer me. Caden needed to provide a new cosigner or an increased security deposit within 30 days, or he needed to vacate. He called me on a Wednesday evening. I let it go to voicemail. He calls again. I let it go to voicemail. He texted, "Avery, what did you do to the lease? Call me back." I read it. I put my phone face down on the coffee table. I watched the rest of the documentary I'd been streaming and went to bed at a reasonable hour. He texted my mum. Of course he did. My mum called the next morning. I picked up because I always pick up for her. She started with, "Your brother is very upset," which is how she has always begun any conversation about something Caden has done wrong, with his feelings as the entry point. I said, I know. She said, why didn't you tell us you were going to do that? I said, I didn't realize I needed to. She said, he can't qualify on his own. You know that. He needs more time. I had heard he needs more time for 3 years. I had also, by that point, counted the total value of what I had quietly subsidized in those same 3 years, the cosigned lease that had kept his credit from taking a hard inquiry hit, the 2+ years of mortgage assistance to my parents that had kept the house stable while Caden contributed exactly nothing, the times I'd covered his share of the family dinner bill without comment, the professional reputation I had handed him by doing the work that went under his name. I did the math. I didn't say the number out loud. I said, I'm not in a position to stay on the lease indefinitely. I should have addressed it sooner. That's on me. She was quiet. Then she said, I just don't understand why you always have to be so. So what? I asked. She didn't finish the sentence. The HR process took 3 more weeks. At the end of it, the outcome was cleaner than I had expected. The documentation was too complete and too time-stamped to argue with. Mr. Doy, Foss, to his credit, was more troubled by what he learned than I had anticipated. Turns out he had genuinely believed Caden had led the project because Caden was the one who had been in his office talking about it. When the actual record was laid in front of him, he was quiet for a long time. Caden's title was reviewed. The word restructuring started appearing in internal memos. The corporate card attached to the BMW lease payment was audited, something that apparently hadn't been looked at carefully since my uncle's tenure, and a number of personal charges were flagged. The lease arrangement on the car was deemed improper and the car was returned to the company's asset list. The BMW was picked up on a Thursday from the firm's parking structure. I was not there to see it. I found out from a coworker who texted me a single exclamation point which told me everything. Caden resigned before he could be formally terminated. He sent me a text the day after that said, I hope you're happy. You destroyed the family. I looked at that text for a while. Then I replied with 3 words. You did that. I don't know what I expected to feel. Relief, maybe, or the hollow satisfaction that I'd heard other people describe after winning an argument they'd been having for years. What I actually felt was tired. The specific tiredness of someone who has been holding something heavy for a long time and has finally been allowed to put it down. My mom didn't speak to me for 6 weeks. When she finally called, she didn't apologize. She asked how I was doing in the carefully neutral tone of someone who is not ready to acknowledge what happened, that also isn't ready to keep the silence going. I said I was fine. I asked about my dad. She told me. We talked for 12 minutes and then said goodbye. I still send the automatic transfer every month, not because anyone asked me to, not because I've forgiven the erasure of 3 years of my work, but because my dad is still sick, and the mortgage is still real, and I am still the person who does what needs to be done, except now I do it on my terms and I keep the receipts. Sloan posted on Instagram 2 weeks after Caden resigned, a long caption about pivoting to new opportunities and choosing peace in uncertain seasons. She tagged Caden. He commented a red heart. 46 people liked it. I didn't like it. I kept scrolling. My new office is on the 4th floor now. The Norwood Library project won a Regional Design Award from the AIA Ohio chapter in October. My name is first on the submission. Mr. Foss gave a toast at the firm's year-end dinner and said my name clearly into the microphone, and I sat to the table and let myself feel that for exactly as long as it lasted, which was a few seconds, which was enough. I thought about standing up at the party, at the conference table in the moment when I should have spoken and didn't. I used to think that silence was the same as dignity. I know now that it isn't. Dignity is knowing what you're worth and making sure the record reflects it. Not loudly, not for revenge, but because accurate records are the only thing that holds in the end. Caden is freelancing now. I hear things through people who know people the way you do in a city this size. He's doing fine, I think. Fine in the way that people who have always had things handed to them are fine. They land somewhere, because someone catches them. It just won't be me anymore. The last time I saw him in person was at Thanksgiving. My mum had asked us both to come, and neither of us was willing to be the one who didn't show up. We sat at opposite ends of the table. He didn't speak to me directly. I passed him the green beans when they came around because they were in front of me, and that's what you do. After dinner, when my mum was in the kitchen and my dad had gone to rest and Sloane was checking her phone in the living room, Caden stood next to me at the counter and said quietly, "I never thought you'd actually do it." I looked at him. He wasn't angry anymore. He just looked like someone who had learned something he hadn't wanted to learn. I said, "I know." And that was the whole conversation. I drove home through the city in the dark, past the Mill Creek corridor, past the stretch of land where the Millville project will break ground in the spring. My project. My 11 months. The renderings had my name on them now, correctly, in the amended filing. The city had updated the record when the firm submitted the correction. I rolled down the window even though it was November. The air was cold and sharp and smelled like leaves and exhaust and something faintly like rain. I didn't need to be thanked. I didn't need anyone to say out loud that they'd gotten it wrong. I just needed the record to be right, and it was. And the view from that particular Tuesday night, driving alone past the thing I built, was the clearest I had felt in years. The night I sat in that back row and watched my brother take a standing ovation for 11 months of my work, I made a choice that had nothing to do with anger. Anger would have made me stand up and say something. What I felt was quieter than that and a lot more dangerous. I've thought about that room a lot since then, about what it means to stay silent when you should speak, and what it means to stay silent when you're already 3 moves ahead. Those are 2 completely different silences, and for most of my 20s I was living in the first one without knowing it. I told myself I was being professional. I told myself the work would speak for itself. What I didn't understand yet was that work only speaks for itself when the record is accurate, and I had spent years letting someone else write the record. What Caden did wasn't just unfair, it was a pattern with a long tail, and if I'm honest, I had been part of that pattern too. Every time I co-signed without conditions, every automatic transfer I made without a conversation, every meeting I ran while his name sat at the top of the org chart, I was making a choice. I told myself it was kindness. It was closer to avoidance. There's a difference between being good and being useful, and I had confused the 2 for a very long time. The thing about building a real case, the kind that holds under scrutiny, is that it requires a different kind of intelligence than the intelligence that builds a good project. It requires you to understand systems, leases, HR processes, file metadata, corporate card audits. None of that is glamorous. None of it feels like power in the moment you are doing it. It just looks like someone at a laptop, late on a Tuesday, making a folder. But that folder is what made everything else possible. Clarity without preparation is just frustration. I had to learn to do both at once. And then there's the part that nobody talks about, which is the part after. Caden texted me that I'd destroyed the family. My mum didn't speak to me for 6 weeks. Sloane posted about pivoting to new opportunities. I drove past the Millvale corridor on a cold November night and felt something I still don't have a perfect word for. Not triumph, not vindication exactly, more like the specific relief of a person who has finally stopped carrying something that was never theirs to carry alone. I still send the transfer to my parents every month. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. I didn't stop helping. I stopped helping silently on someone else's terms, in ways that made other people's bad behavior easier. That's not the same thing as walking away. It's closer to knowing the difference between what you owe people and what you've simply been allowing. Avery, the version of me who sat in that back row, needed all 3 of those things at once: the integrity to not become what I was fighting against, the clarity to build something airtight before I moved, and the patience to wait until the moment was right. Take any one of those away and the whole thing falls apart. Without the integrity, I become the kind of person who retaliates messily and loses the moral ground. Without the clarity, I have a grievance but no proof. Without the patience, I act too soon and give him the chance to reframe the story. The BMW got picked up on a Thursday, I found out from a co-worker's exclamation point. That was enough.